We actually made a decision based on the, let's say, find a clearer way to organize the literature, because we have a huge amount of papers that write about the resilience of the firm level, at the organizational level, and then in between organizations and firms you have multivarious organizations, no profits, and the public sector. And adding also this one would have been too much complicated, in the sense that also the positioning of the study would be different, because if you dig into this literature, you can find other definitions. And then, of course, if we theorize and if we define resilience as the capacity of a system to bounce back, to absorb, we can agree on these general definitions. But firms and no-profits and public organizations, they not always behave the same, and not always they face the same unexpected events. And they not always start from the same points of equilibrium, because they are managed differently and they have different behaviors. So this is why at the end we decided to really carry out a systematic literature review that had very, very strict boundaries, and also a very, very clear positioning within the management literature, but management literature that deal with private firms. So I think that was the main reason, the reason why we adopt this inclusion criteria.
Was just a matter of methodological easiness in undertaking the review, and the aim of being a bit more specific, because all the previous literature is a bit generic in this regard, and tries and sometimes puts in together many different levels of analysis and types of organizations. So the idea would have been to try to be more focused on one type of firm. And then, of course, as you said, for-profit organizations and public organizations are extremely relevant and to study in terms of resilience. But as Elisa mentioned, they start with different bundles of resources and competencies. They have different objectives. They have different types of governance and management structures, so they need to be devoted at a separate study.
We recently had a PhD workshop, and I reviewed 2 systematic literature review of PhD students at their first year, and what I told them is about not only to have clear and strict boundary conditions, and also to clearly define which are the inclusion criteria, because when we start, we want to include everything, every paper that we read, and there is this sense of being lost in the literature. Each time that you read a paper, you feel, oh, I missed this one, and you manually add papers over papers. But I think that there is a point in which first of all, you have to close. So to delimit a time frame, and also to ask yourself, which is the research question that guides your systematic literature review. For us was, which is the meaning? So how resilience is conceptualized within the management literature. And I think that the research question is the only thing, is the light that has to guide you in including or excluding papers. Otherwise, you will get lost. And your research question is also what would guide you in finding the theoretical contribution of your paper. Because sometimes when we read, but also publish literature that has as a methodological, as a research design, as the systematic literature review, sometimes what is missed is the theoretical contribution. So carrying out a systematic literature review is not only about reorganizing, clustering literature, but it's about creating new knowledge. So analyzing what is already there, organizing, but also finding a new way of conceptualizing a term that in this case is resilience. But starting from the research question, so having clear in mind the research question, I think that is the only way to craft a relevant piece of research that will stay in the years that will come.
With systematic literature reviews, we are always very concerned with the methodology, with these inclusion and exclusion criteria, with providing some statistics, with providing some clustering of the papers. But then in the end, what we need to do with the systematic literature review, and more in general also with other approaches to literature review, I think is to provide a critical lens on the papers that we read, a new way of interpreting the data, the literature, because otherwise it just becomes an exercise of trying to cluster the paper with some statistics and descriptive stats. So in the end, what it matters, my opinion, apart from the method that you follow, could be a systematic, it could be a bibliographic, could be whatever. In the end, what it matters is the contribution and the light that the authors are able to shed on interpreting the literature that they have read. Probably if we had more time, as we were saying before, we could have ideally include also the different types of firm and try to isolate the different conceptions of resilience according to the type of firm. So the private, less for profit, and the public / non-profit firms. That would have been probably an add-on of the paper, but there's always a trade-off in focusing and broadening the resource. So we went on with the first option of focusing on for-profit firms.